I look at this from a couple different perspectives, and because I was in it through, from '89 on, I was on duty working in our security operations center when really the first big terrorist event happened. This is prior to the first bombing of the World Trade Center. A Pakistani terrorist shot up our front gate at CIA headquarters.
You are now listening to On the Beat Podcast.
Okay, welcome to the On the Beat Podcast number 13 with Lou Maroto and myself, John Riddle. Lou, how you doing today?
Good morning. Doing great.
Good morning. Okay, today's going to be a very special podcast, and we'll see how long we can go with this, because this is, for me, it's very interesting. This type of stuff has always interested me, and I kind of kicked myself in the butt for not getting involved in it in my earlier years in military time. But our guest has over 27 years of experience working in the security field, 24 of those working with the CIA. He retired from the CIA as a GS-15, and a senior security manager working in protective operations, counterterrorism, and security training. He was the chief of security in several countries, where he was responsible for countrywide security programs, ensuring the safety and security of all CIA personnel in high-threat environments. That's pretty heavy. It's that's a big job. Okay, as a seasoned veteran in protection world, he led teams protecting the CIA. Okay, so now you're protecting the CIA guys, right? So that's pretty cool. And also protecting visiting VIP personnel, to include the President and Vice President of the United States, as well as Senate and congressional delegations. He spent 3 years providing specialized protective operations training courses to foreign governments and that have protective services from Latin America, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. So he had his hands full there also. He received the Intelligence Star, the CIA's second highest honor for valor.
Yep.
He also received Career Intelligence Medal for service, reflecting exceptional achievements. Our guest has a Master's of Arts degree in Communications from the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and the Bachelor's of Arts degree in Communications from Marquette University. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome our guest, Mr. Tom Pecora. Tom, welcome aboard.
Welcome,
Thank you, John.
sir.
Nice to meet you.
I couldn't get that intro as good as Mike Riddle. Come up with something slick. But
Yeah.
it was all right. How you been? How you doing?
Good. Working my way through the adventures of COVID land that we're working our way through.
You locked down over there?
They're going into tier 3, which is a heavier lockdown starting tomorrow.
Okay.
So all the way up until Christmas. And I'm in London right now, or near London, and that's where they're going to go, and they're going to let all the inmates out for Christmas. So people will be able to get out and about and meet with family. But after that, they can go back into lockdown. So not good times here.
Yeah. We're lucky here in Florida. The governor has not issued any lockdowns, so we're free to move around. It's just it's our responsibility to be careful and do what we need to do to make sure we stay safe. So we have that going for us here, right?
Yeah, for the most part, most people are being responsible, but you always have that 1%, that refuse.
Invincible.
Invincible.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Tom, tell me, how did you get involved with the CIA?
Well, as a kid, I was really interested in federal service, and I was 7 years old when I sent away for an employment package with the FBI. I'd heard that they'll send you one. As a kid, to have a federal agency send you mail is pretty cool. So I sent away, and I got a package, a huge manila envelope full of stuff. Now they know a 7-year-old is not applying, but they're pretty good with their PR. And so I was really into being involved in the government. And so I kind of knew from that age that I was going to be involved. And I ended up, fast forward, I was in grad school, and I decided to answer an ad in the newspaper, in my local newspaper in Milwaukee Journal. And received a phone call back about a month later. And I thought it was one of my friends giving me the razz. So this is not the CIA. And so I ended up in an interview, and then it's a long process to get in, on more than 6 months, including interviews and polygraph and all that. And they put me into security, which was a good fit. And then I ended up in kind of going a little outside the normal bailiwick for a security officer. I ended up in the operations side. I got involved in some protection work that wasn't even available prior to 1989 when I came on board. Okay. So I had a chance to do a lot of different things in my career.
That's interesting. Is it odd for an agency like that to advertise like that in the paper?
Back then, it was a little odd. They would do a lot more work at university job fairs, and then like now they do it on the internet. You've got CIA.gov, and people are applying through there. Right. So it was really strange. I didn't know anybody worked for the federal government, much less the CIA, in my little hometown of Milwaukee. So it was a real strange event in my life to get interviewed and then selected, and then I moved from 1989. I moved away from Milwaukee, and I really never have moved back.
Okay, all right. So once you got involved, you went through their selection process, I assume, and then what was the first position you held there?
I was got into the career track of what we call multidisciplinary security officer, MDSO. So one of what they do is they move you around in different positions to learn different skills. So normally the first position they put you in is doing background investigations. So I was sent out to a city to do backgrounds for 2 years, and it was I was doing mainly engineers and people working in the defense contract area. And to say that it was boring would be an understatement.
I understand.
I mean, there's nothing interesting. I mean, these were all good people. I mean, every once in a while I got a little dirt, but mostly it was just, going through the motions, doing the interviews, checking neighborhoods and all that. And after almost 2 years, I was pretty much like, what happened to the excitement of this job? I want out. And then luckily something fell into my lap, and I was able to do something different at that point. And it really changed my whole career.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because the last time we spoke, I was telling you we talked about the background investigation thing, and I did background investigations for our police department. And yeah, it's
not that exciting.
It's really not exciting at all.
Necessary
it's like watching paint dry, Okay, so you're in the midst of doing these background investigations. What was the next step, and how did you get there?
There was something that came across our screens requesting volunteers to join a new organization within security, a new element that was going to provide protective operations support, protection for our personnel working in high threat areas around the world. And so I applied, and I was selected to the first official training class in 1991. And this is the organization is the precursor to the group that you may have become familiar with the movie 13 Hours, where there was a group of security officers who came to the rescue of the State Department employees in Benghazi, Libya, on 9/11, 2012. And that element, basically the origin is the unit that I was in. And it was called the POC, Protective Operations Cadre, because it wasn't a full-time element. And so we went through training, and basically we had to create the training on the fly because it had never been done before. We're talking about clandestine protective operations. No shiny glasses, no suits, Your client is a case officer. Our guys going out recruiting spies. They work in a clandestine environment, so they can't have any tension brought to their activities. So we're trying to protect them without anybody knowing that they're being protected. So we took information and training from any source within the government that we could. We took undercover training information from DEA, from police departments. We work with Secret Service. We work with the U.S. military, all to try to put together a new program. And then we started working in some of the worst places in the world. My first assignment was in Mogadishu, Somalia, just prior to Black Hawk Down. In fact, I left only a couple of days before that happened.
Wow.
And so there was it was a very interesting time to be doing that type of work. In the past, we only had protective operations in CIA to protect our leadership, our director, our deputy director. And then, of course, we had our uniform division, which protected our facilities. So this was a totally new element. And we were clandestine up until the Benghazi incident. Up until that point, you never knew we were there unless you were on the inside. And we operated in the worst places in the world all those years. And because of the nature of the work and the techniques we used, we had an extremely high success rate. In fact, we never lost a protectee. We lost up until a couple of years ago. We only lost one of our officers in doing our primary mission, which is mobile protection, moving our protectee from place to place, doing operations, doing the static stuff. When we get dragged into defending a building or working security on a base, that's when we've lost some people. For example, we lost some people in Coast to a suicide bomber. If you've seen the movie Zero Dark 30, that was highlighted in that movie. And so it was an exciting element to be a part of. And I never thought I would ever be able to talk about it. So when 13 Hours popped, the book and the movie, I thought, wow, I maybe I get a chance to actually, I wrote a book about the origin story of the unit, and it's called Guardian: Life in the Crosshairs of the CIA's War on Terror.
Yeah.
So that was just part of my career.
Tom, I'm curious, what did it feel like to go when you first started as a background investigator, and all of a sudden you are afforded an opportunity, like you said, something lands in your lap and it gives you the opportunity to go into the security side of the agency. What did it feel like? What did you go in? Was that?
And it's funny you mentioned that, because when I got the word back that I had applied and was accepted into the new program, I had an ear-to-ear grin. And one of my managers walks by and said, "Don't be so happy." I looked across at one of the senior agents in the work bay we were working in, and he looked over at me and he just said, "Screw that guy," because he understood how exciting, this new opportunity was going to be, and it made a huge. I mean, it was a major fork in the road in terms of my career. I ended up going into the operational side of not only security, but I actually had opportunities to what we call rotate into the op side, and I worked supporting operations, working against terrorist groups, things that prior to 1990 a security officer would never be involved in.
So it opened a lot of doors for you.
Tons. And it was just what I grew up on the James Bond movies and books.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I was in for the adventure.
Outstanding.
All right. The different countries you worked in, you said, well, when I read it, it was Latin America, Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Europe, working with our people there, correct? And also working with the people in their protective operations section. Is that correct?
Yes. For 3 years, I was trained in basically presidential level protection details for certain countries.
Okay.
Yeah.
What country did you enjoy working in the most, and which was the hottest country, and not climate wise, but which was the most dangerous areas you would work in those countries?
Worked in Bogota in the 90s,
Okay.
and I was working closely with the DOS, which is their equivalent of the FBI. And that was when Pablo Escobar was blowing up cars and killing people all over Colombia, especially in Bogota. We were on a lockdown there. I mean, like 9 a.m. curfews. You couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't leave the city. And I did 7 trips there, training them. And that was interesting. There wasn't anybody I met who didn't know somebody was killed by the cartels. Mm-hmm. And that was heavy. That was heavy. So that was an interesting place to work. I trained. One of the craziest places I did some training was in Albania, and that was a difficult place to work. The Albanians had just come out of a kind of an economic crisis, and so they had no money, they had no budget, they had nothing. So we were trying to train them up. So that was a difficult time. The most fun I had was actually my first trip. I went to Bolivia, and I was trained in a police unit that supported the presidential protection detail when they would come down to this one city where he basically would vacation. And these police officers had no idea what they were getting into, and they were just so warm-hearted people. And so that was fun. That was fun. But I worked from one interesting story is we would work with a lot of Secret Service retirees. And one of them, they would be our contractors working with us. I would run the program, and I would have an interpreter if I needed it for language, and I would have some contractors. And we did a training course with the Argentinians, and they had a very young training group doing their presidential protection training. And they would start off all their training with a Spanish dubbed videotape of a show from the US called Top Cops. And the episode they would do was the one on the Secret Service agent that saved Ronald Reagan, Jerry Parr. So they were all indoctrinated on that. So we show up the week before the course to do our admin, get ready. We walk in the room, they take one look at my contractor, and I'm telling you, they almost dropped to their knees because I had Jerry Parr. Oh. And they were on the phone to the president of Argentina to tell him that Jerry Parr was in country. And we ended up with a meeting with the president. He came running over to the car, and he basically, here's a quote. He said, "Every president wants a Jerry Parr." It was a great 3 years. They were smiling when you arrived, and you were crying at the airport when you left. So it was a good time.
Sounds good. Sounds good. What was, I know you talk a little bit about the Philippines in the book. What was your experience there?
That's one of my favorite places in the world. I fell in love with the people. I spent a lot of time there. I did counterterrorism work there initially in the 90s, and then I was posted there for 3 years. And I was a one-man security shop there during the height of 9/11. And we were dealing with terrorist groups doing kidnapping of U.S. persons. We had terrorists trying to blow us up. So it was exciting times, to say the least. And the Filipinos are just such wonderful people. They have such resilience, tough lives, a beautiful place. So I spent a lot of time there. In fact, that's where I've got a retirement visa. So yeah, where I have an apartment I'm waiting to get back to.
Okay, all right. So today, these days, if Americans wanted to go to the Philippines to visit, to vacation and such, what would they have to do? What would they have to look out for to protect themselves, protect their families?
Actually, that's a good question, and it's the same pretty much everywhere. the way we looked at it, and this goes into kind of the philosophy that the CIA has always had in terms of personal protection for our people. We've looked at personal safety as an individual requirement. Every person in our organization is responsible for their own safety, now, even though we have a security element, and we have a philosophy of putting a lot of effort, the majority of effort, into avoiding problems. So avoidance is number one. We look at like a 90-10. 90% of your time should be spent on avoidance and 10% on the worst case scenario, which is you didn't avoid and now you got to deal with it. And it's worked extremely well for us. And it's that philosophy that you need whenever you go basically out of the United States or any place where you don't have the rule of law and the level of law enforcement that we have in the United States. You have to be on your toes. There's bad cities everywhere in the world. I mean, there's areas of Southeast DC that I wouldn't go into without an armored car. There's sections of Manila that are exactly the same, Tondo and places like that. But if you keep your wits about you and you do, what we like to call it situational awareness, but unfortunately that's just a buzzword now, and it's not taken to the level that we have in my organization. We've refined that concept to a kind of a real top-notch level, and it's worked real well keeping our people safe.
Now, when you speak about situational awareness and having it at that higher level with what you do, I get on when I go out and about teaching classes, and even when I'm teaching here at my classes, my self-defense classes, I talk about situational awareness and how people need to be aware of their personal awareness and also their surroundings, listening, seeing different things. And so how do you take that to that higher level from there?
It's a mental process. That's the hard part. And it's all about before. When you're on the X, when you're in the middle of the bad situation, it's too late. Your options are down to very few. And we like to look at it as you don't want to ever be in that position. So you better get motivated to do whatever you got to do to stay off the X, the location where the bad guy wants you. So it starts out with a mental attitude. What I found when I left the government and went in the private sector, I found that we were missing a piece there. We didn't have, when we did training, we didn't have the stick that we had in the agency. At the CIA, we would tell people, we're going to allow you to go overseas and do all this fun stuff, but if you get in trouble, you're probably not going to go overseas again. Okay, because you're supposed to be doing clandestine work, and that clandestine doesn't mean involvement with law enforcement or getting hurt or getting robbed. Right. So we had this stick that we kind of use on them, and we got it into their heads, the realization that bad things can happen to you. And if you don't start with that first thought, it's all a lie. And everything that they do from that moment on is like a house on sand. So you've got to beat the denial factor. People have to come to the realization, and it's very tough nowadays because we've got such a risk-averse mental attitude that we don't want to talk about risk. We don't want to talk about things that are bad. We just want to look away. And you have to face this, not in a sense of paranoia, but in a sense of reality. FBI crime statistics are there for a reason. They're not lies. Those are real. So you have to look at the world and say, is it a dangerous place? Yes. Can something bad happen to me? Yes. Okay, what am I going to do about it? So starting with the no denial factor. In other words, we're not in Egypt, and there is no denial. Okay, we are moving. The next step is we've got to believe that we can do something about it. That we have a choice, and that choice is we can choose not to be a victim. So we've gone from a mental passive to a mental active. We're not going to be a victim. And how do we do that? There's a lot of things we can do. So we got to decide that we're not going to be a victim, and then we're going to do whatever it takes to be safe. So now we've got our motivation, and we're moving into the next step, which is preparation. We've got to prepare. So part of that is, you've got to kind of articulate, and this is something that was really big in the tactics in the old days of law enforcement when the officers, I think in the 70s and 80s, were getting ambushed. A reason to live. You've got to articulate in your own mind what motivates you, because when things get bad, you've got to have something to hold on to. There's a guy named Dr. Viktor Frankl. He wrote a book called The Meaning of Life. He was writing it on scraps of paper while he was in a concentration camp. Now, you want to talk about a guy with a positive mindset. For some reason, he thought he was going to survive it. And what he was writing about was he was looking at who was surviving in the camps and who weren't. And he was digging down into that, and he found out it was the people who had a reason to live. So it wasn't the biggest guy or the strongest guy. It was the guys with guys and the gals who really wanted to live, and they had something to grab onto. So now we have our motivation all lined up. Let's do our preparation. Well, preparation, besides the mental mindset, which is number one, we've got to have some plans. Hope is not a plan, right?
Right.
And because I've dealt with a lot of people in the war zone, I've worked all the major war zones from 93 to 2013 that the U.S. was in. So Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Haiti, Bosnia, you name it. And I had to try to get people ready for those environments. So we had to get them into an emergency action mindset. And part of that is you can't give them a 50-page manual. They'll look at it for a second and they'll walk away.
Yeah, they won't read it. Yeah.
Right? So you got to give them a plan. We like to we call it KISS, but not in the old sense. It's keep it simple and sustainable. That last word is even more important than the other ones, because if it's not sustainable, it just doesn't work. You can't keep it going. So we would put together some really basic plans and I like to go back to the one that we all grew up with. When you walked up to your mom and you're 8 years old and you said, I'm going down to Johnny's house. What would she say to you? Okay, where are you going? Who are you going to be with? When are you going to come back? The who, what, who, W, all those. Who, what, where, when, why. And that's how I would actually phrase it to the people in the war zones. I said, I'm mom. I need to know all this. And you need to keep me appraised. And then they'd laugh because they all know that one, but they can relate to it. So setting up an emergency action plan for them is getting them to understand that it's just a hair different than what mom asked for. And so we would put them into that mindset. And then we'd start to give them some basic plans. One of the most basic plans that you've heard now, that's big with active shooters, what? Run, hide, fight, right? Keep it simple. Three things, because the brain works real well with threes. So we try to get people to learn some of the emergency action plans that are already in their environment. Most people already know about the fire plans, right? Where the fire extinguishers are, where the fire alarm boxes, where's your fire exits. Those are pretty simple. We're not talking about too much more than that. We're just adding on to that, your environmental knowledge. So it's getting your mind right, then starting your prep. So in other words, you're loading the mind as a weapon. You're given an ammunition to use in the fight. And then from there, you start to build the skills. The skill level stuff, super basic is first aid. What's the big one that's out right now? Stop the bleed. Right. Stop the bleed is huge. That is the most bare bones first aid training and is the most useful that we're ever going to run across, because people die in a few minutes from bleed outs. So I'd say as a minimum, that's where your training starts. And then you work your way into like situational awareness training, some advanced training with somebody who knows what they're doing. There are a variety of people who teach it. I mean, you teach it as part of your courses. There's organizations that teach it. I just joined an organization that feels so strongly about situational awareness that that's all they do. Okay. Your Curie group. So these are some of the baselines that we work on. It's super basic, but if you don't have those basics, the advanced stuff doesn't work.
Right. Makes sense.
Tom, let me ask you a question. Being that you've been around you've gone to so many different countries and worked in different capacities, communication, language barriers. How did you work with that? How did you deal with that?
It's funny. I've been in over 60 countries. I worked in a lot of bad places and repeats.
Sure.
And I was alone in some of them. When I was doing operational work, I was alone. I'm lucky I can blend in a little bit in certain countries. And the hair has gone gray, but it used to be darker. And I could blend into in the Middle East and South America and that. But it's amazing how well you can do without actually knowing the language. Maybe a few words. It's always good to know a few swears so that you can deal with the taxi drivers. But in general, there's almost like an unspoken language, a way of getting around and doing things. There's the pointing at the menu. There's some basics, and then of course English is all over the place. Sometimes I'd like to pretend that I didn't speak English to further my cover, so I would speak Spanish in places they don't speak Spanish, and somebody somewhere would pull their rusty Spanish out. In some of the Arab countries, they would speak some Spanish, and they would be conversing, and they had no idea that I was an American. So language was not as difficult, but there's still a matter of learning your way around, and that's a kind of a skill set in its own.
Absolutely. Dealing with once you got to, I don't know if I'm kind of going ahead a little bit here, but once you got into the teaching aspect, now you're training agents to do what you've done. How difficult was it to deal with these different personalities? Because I'm sure you're getting guys from different units, different sectors, different parts of the government, and most of these guys are Type A personalities, I believe. How hard is that to work with?
I worked with, we would, in the protection world up until 9/11, we were all internal. But after 9/11, we didn't have enough people. So we started bringing in direct hires and contractors to include all the tier 1 groups. So SEAL Team 6, the Delta Force,
right.
Marine Force Recon. And a lot of these guys were really good at what they did, but that's not what we did. And that was so I had to change their mindset. Everything is the mind. It's the real weapon in the room. So, for example, a lot of them had a feeling of authority. They were either a uniform division guy before, or they were a former law enforcement. So I would have to try to break that mentality down. They're going to work with a client, our case officers, protecting them in dangerous places in clandestine mode. And they're going to have to do it without drawing attention. So they couldn't grasp it. So I said, okay, you're going to have to learn to do what they do. You're going to be the case officer for a while. So I actually taught them operational activities like spy stuff. I would teach them surveillance. I would teach them car pickups, brush passes, all these things that the trade craft. And the surveillance thing is where I really got them, because I'd say, okay, now you're a bad guy. Your job is to surveil us from the point of view of you're a terrorist. So now you're going to have to think like one. And as a terrorist, you have no authority. So if you get caught doing anything, jaywalking, you're going to jail. So you got to change your mind, and that changes their body, the way they act. So we would put them out in places where they'd have to surveil us, and they would be doing things that were okay if you're a good guy, but are going to stand out as a bad guy. And we would catch them, and we'd say, listen, you can't stand there next to a car. You've got to have the hood up. You've got to have some cover for action, cover for stats, some reason for being there. So we would break down their mentality and change it to where they understood who they're working for, and they're in a new mindset. So it was start with the mind and then work your way out.
Interesting.
Yeah. Very cool.
Interesting.
Now, with going back to the awareness, I know out in the field, like you said, you have to be very situationally aware of everything that's going on around you, picking up things. Now, coming into what you're doing now, do you have the ability to still teach that to the other government people and other foreign governments?
If I work with foreign governments, there's some areas that I can't go into, that I can't do training. It has to be approved. So if it's some real basic stuff, I can do it. If it's anything like if I was going to train them on surveillance work or really in-depth counterterrorism, I'd have the U.S. government would have a problem with that, and I would have a problem with that. Even when we were doing protective operations training, it was defensive, not offensive. So now, in terms of the awareness training, I can do that because a lot of what we did. It's funny how it fits the same. What we're doing is the reverse of clandestine activity in a way. Instead of hiding from people, we're now looking for people who are possibly hiding from us, basically the criminals. So we use a lot of the same techniques that we would use. I'll give you one example. Was when it comes to enhancing your situational awareness, where you position yourself is critical. As working in law enforcement or the military, this is something you pick up almost as a part of breathing in that environment. Everybody fights for the one chair in the specific position at the table where they have their back to the wall and they can see everybody coming in. And then everybody goes, okay, I'll sit with my back to the door, but you gotta watch my back, right? You gotta watch my six.
Yeah.
And positioning is critical. It's something that I used to teach in terms of doing surveillance, and now I teach it in terms of doing surveillance in terms of looking for the bad guy or being aware of your surroundings. Positioning, sitting versus standing, lowering your profile, high ground versus low ground. High ground's always better. There's all kinds of slight things that we can do in our environment and what we do that enhances our situational awareness tremendously and allows us to be one step ahead. Because as the joke goes, what's the first rule of gunfighting? If you know there's going to be a gunfight, don't show up.
Don't show up. Don't be there. Exactly.
All we do is avoid. Remember, that's our whole mindset.
Is that fun? Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I was in Mogadishu. We were running the roads. It was terrible. I mean, threat level was off the roof, and I'd been working with Delta. We actually were running their guys around prior to the main element coming in, and we came in, and the Marine Force, fast Marines were guarding our embassy. Well, actually, it was our compound, and you hear me, they were just looking at us like, wow, these guys are out on the roads all the time. And one of them walks up and says, hey, you guys get hit, what are you going to do? And we looked at him, we said, we're going to run like hell. And the look on his face, we totally popped the bubble, He's like, what? Yes, he didn't understand. When you're in a protection detail, a two-car motorcade, you may have 4 guys, all right, with M4s against what? They're gonna see you for 4 and raise you for 8. So they're gonna hit you with 12 guys, and they're gonna add an RPG in the mix. And I mean, you don't stand a chance. So run away and live another day.
Absolutely. There you go.
Schooling. Once I'm sure you're constantly going to different schools once you get assigned to that specific unit you were in. But the schools primarily in the U.S., if you can talk about it, or most of the schools were overseas or different countries.
Kind of interesting. The agency was kind of when I was in, they weren't. They didn't like to share. They didn't like to go outside too often. But I got a chance to go out, and I worked my way into a Secret Service firearms instructor training class at Beltsville. That was awesome. Secret Services, their system is down pat. And it was great because they were at such a high level of safety, which was great because the next job, right, I took those skills and I went right to the teaching the foreigners. and some of them don't have any safety skills in the fire. I mean, we're talking so scared. Wow. So that was really great. I did H&K, 2 H&K schools. And I learned a lot internally from some of our people who'd come back from schools, especially some of the specialized shooting schools. So I learned a lot from them. But we did a lot of learning on the job because we had to adapt. And man, that's a word of such power. When you don't have a big budget, you've got to figure out a way to armor the car. So in Somalia, we got metal plating from a helicopter and we put it in the sides of the car. We wanted to hide our identity, so we tinted the windows. We wrapped the seats in pistol rated body armor. Now, I won't stop a rifle round, but it may slow down something. So we adapted. So we were always trying to adapt. And that helped us with our mindset, because when you go to a new country, you've got to look around and go, all right, they do things differently here. We don't want to look like the red dot moving through all the black dots.
Right. Exactly. So you're going to have to make do with what you have, right? And just do the best you can to blend in. Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us about the Intelligence Star?
That's one of those things that you if you live, you get it. If you don't, they chisel it into the wall.
Right.
So it's a pretty somber thing. And so when we lose people, they chisel a star into the wall of honor. And I was in Somalia on a team moving our case officers around. We were working to get Farah Adid, who was the warlord.
Right.
And we were working with Delta Force at the time to try to fix and find fix and then able to, finish him. And we ended up getting caught in an ambush that had actually gone down against a Nigerian checkpoint. They killed 7, they skinned 1 or 2 alive. It was just horrible. So we ended up just by bad luck driving into this ambush, and we were able to utilize the training that we had gotten. We call it ambush counter ambush. Basically, you want to do all these preparatory things to avoid the ambush, but if you find yourself in an ambush situation, you've got to have your pre-programmed plans ready, and you've got to hit it immediately. So what happened was we were driving through a crowd. We ended up in an area that was filled with smoke, burning tires. We couldn't see ahead of us, and we slowed down to a crawl. And we got lucky. There was a bit of breeze that just took out the smoke at about knee level, and we could look ahead, and we saw a Connex box, one of those freight containers, huge, that they put on the ships. Basically, they had dragged it across the road and blocked it. The guy driving our vehicle, we were in the front car. It was an Isuzu Trooper, not armored. We had just the metal plates that we had on the doors. And he, with no hesitation whatsoever, hit a U-turn. And but even before he could hit that U-turn, we started taking rounds from the right side. And these rounds were punching through that Isuzu like a can opener through a can. And we made the U-turn, started going back down the road, and we missed the X. We caught just the tail end of it. But then they started hitting us from the other side. And we took rounds, and our protectee got hit in the neck. And we made our way to an Italian checkpoint, and I was trying to do first aid on it, but it severed. We later found out it severed most of his subclavial artery, so he's bleeding out internally, and it was So we had to make a decision. The Italians at that checkpoint really weren't going to help us. So we had to make a run back to the university compound where we had the main U.S. military element and a hospital. So we were able to luckily get him back in time, and they did emergency surgery, and they replaced the artery with part out of his leg and replaced some of a nerve. So he survived. So the four of us were awarded the Intelligence Star for that event.
Good work.
So it was a pretty crazy time.
Yeah. Now, in Somalia, working against these guys there, this was prior to 9/11?
Yeah, 1993.
Okay, so terrorist organizations there in Somalia, were they related in any way? Were there any type of training camps there from
That's an
bin Laden?
excellent question. What we found out when we were tracking Faradid, who was a very cagey guy, he wouldn't spend more than 1 or 2 nights in one location. It's very hard to track. We found out that the Somalis were really not good soldiers because they really were not trained, and they would do drugs, cot during the day, and then they would be sleepy at night, and they go to sleep 9 o'clock. That's it. No nighttime attacks. But then we get word that some bad, well-trained element was coming into town, and they were going to up the ante. And so the first day that Delta Force arrived, which was Task Force Ranger, under the guise of the Ranger group, the Delta Force was hidden in them. Now, I'm not giving away any classified. This is all part of record. Anything I talk about now it has been approved. I went through a full approval process on this for my book. But what happened was this element came in, and they gave a welcome to the Delta that first night. They dropped pinpoint accurate mortar fire right into the Delta camp, which was right on the edge of the airport. They damaged some of the Little Bird helicopters, and they shrapnel with a couple guys. This was totally unusual. First of all, it was a nighttime attack. Second of all, Somalis couldn't hit the broadside of a barn back then, and this was pinpoint. So we knew something was up. These are the guys that figured out a way to take down our choppers, our Black Hawks. That's how we ended up with Black Hawk Down. We found out later that these guys were Osama bin Laden's group. This was an Al-Qaeda precursor unit that he sent in. So there you go. There's a terrorist element coming in and changing the dynamic. And we didn't know this till later. I had this weird thing in my career of we had intercrossing paths, Al-Qaeda and bin Laden and I, for most of my career. That was my first run in.
Okay. So was it training camp? Was there a training camp there for them, or
there might have been one out in the hinterlands. Well, at the time, we didn't quite know where they were coming from. We just knew they were coming into the city and it was only later when we were able to put the pieces together that we realized who it was and what they were doing. But the training camp thing is huge.
how did you find that out? What was it? How did you put that?
That's where intel sources.
Okay.
A lot of this stuff, like, we didn't find out till later that Faradid was hunting us. Mm-hmm. The protection detail. He had physical descriptions of 3 of us. He had most of our vehicles pegged because Faradid used to be an asset.
Okay.
Earlier. Mm-hmm. So he knew how we operated, and he knew who was hunting him. And we were the most dangerous because we were the intel element.
Sure.
So he was after us, and there was a reward out for each of our heads. So, yeah.
Interesting.
It's crazy. I want to ask you a little funny, not a funny question, but just tell me a story. What are maybe one of your funniest memories in trying to train new agents to do what you do to become masters at that craft? Any funny stories in trying to get these guys up to speed? Something that pops off the top of your head, that you can
Well, they didn't
talk
find it
about.
funny, but I did. uh, it was again, it was trying to change their mindset, and
Right.
I had to get them to understand that case officers they're reporters, okay, that work in dangerous places, and they're sources. It's just like you go out and find a source, and they get the information, they run back, and they write their article, right? So if you were going to do a real TV series with the case officers, it would be the whole show, if it was an hour long, would be 10 minutes of action and 50 minutes of writing them at a keyboard.
Sounds like police work.
Yeah.
I was trying to get our people to understand was that they live and die by the pen. So when we work with them, we have to change the way we communicate with them. If we're going to write up a report, it can't be on a ripped off piece of paper in chicken scratch. And we did a planning session, and the guys came back, and they were late, and they wrote this thing up, and there were grammatical errors. It was just, and I basically had to kind of chew them out. And I remember the look on their faces because they weren't used to it.
Like, how dare you try to chew me out?
Yeah, how dare you? And in the back, the guy who was running see, I was brought in for the specific segment on tradecraft. The guy who was running the overall training, he's got his head in his hands. He thinks, but this was a lesson that later on they came back and said, "Oh, we get it now. We totally get it. The only way you're going to get any respect, and you're not going to be treated like a chauffeur, is if they think that you understand what they're doing and respect what they're doing, and B, that you can help them, you can be an asset." So I mean, looking back, it was funny. At the time, it wasn't so funny, but me and that training officer, we had a pretty good laugh about it later. But I just look at it on his face as he's got his head in his hands. He's thinking, "Oh, he's going to have a mutiny." It's not always fun because I took this stuff very serious. Somalia changed my life. I've had some conversations with people who were in denial. And I told them that when the blood, the hot, warm blood flows all over the front of your vest, there's no more denial. So, this is real. So I had to do a lot of no shitters. And when you're going into the war zone, I felt, and I probably stepped on some toes, but I felt that they needed to be aware and awake. And I wasn't going to play along and pretend that it was a movie that they were in and they're the star and nothing bad could ever happen, because it can't.
Out of all the time that you were overseas, how much time did you actually spend stateside? Were you always gone? Or was that pager?
Yeah, this is a good question. I was doing it was the end of my career, and I was asked to do, there was a leadership training class for new support officers. Security is part of support, like logistics and medical and HR and all that. So they asked me to talk about what it's like to be a security officer, career and all. So I came up and I told them some war stories and all that. And there was a lady in the back of the room. She was a student, but she was older than the normal students, right? She was in her upper 30s. And she goes, "So how did all that travel affect your relationships?" And I was like, oh.
It's another door it opened.
It was disastrous. I couldn't resist some of the things that were offered to me with my background. So the longest span I ever spent in one place really was the 3 years I was posted in the Philippines out of 24. I was always gone. And as I told that class, I said, you can do some of what I did, but you can't do all of what I did and maintain any type of familial relationship and all that. It just, you're going to be, the triple divorcee guy, and it's just not going to work. And there's a cost. For 23 out of 24 years, I was undercover. I would lie to you about where I worked. And that's not fun. It's difficult, And so there's a lot of deceit that goes into that.
Sure.
And it's something not all the security officers have, but some do. And some people in the organization, not all, have to live like that. So it's not fun, but.
Now, do most of the people, when they're in relationships, do they hide it well from whoever they're in a relationship with, or is there any way that they can maybe say something that says, hey, I'm doing this or I'm doing that, and I'm not going to be around a lot? Or is there a cover story that you're given that you have to live by?
Kind of all of the above. In general, when people, who are undercover, they get married, and like their immediate family they'll let them know, because it becomes too difficult. Because what happens is humans they're not dumb, and they can smell a rat. And what happens is they don't know what it is, but they know something's wrong.
Right.
And it starts like acid. It just slowly starts to eat away at your relationships. Mm-hmm. So there's a certain amount you can tell them, but there's other times when, like, my immediate family knew that I was in, but when I was recalled to go to Bosnia over Christmas, I couldn't tell them that. So I was going to a training. I left the day after Christmas, and I was going to a training course in Europe. Now, they knew damn well I wasn't going to Europe, but I wasn't going to tell them I was coming in to Bosnia, where I'm going to do force protection with, I'm going to be hunting terrorists. We're looking for terrorists who are looking to attack U.S. Personnel in the war zone of Bosnia over New Year's. That's just not going to happen. Right. And then even when you're like, I was posted to Iraq for a year. I was head of security there. Every time there were bombings in the green zone, my family suffered, and it's tough. You're never alone. Your family's there with you. So I'm a huge fan of the military. I've worked with them all over every element you can imagine. But we work in places they don't even go. And we're in places 365 days a year. I can tell you that I had people posted in places where I supported people in places in countries where they couldn't even go outside. Their posting was a year and they could not see daylight. They'd be up on the roof at night to get their outside time. And the dangers, in one place, we couldn't get to them in bad weather or night. So if they had an appendicitis and a bad weather situation, they're dead. So there was a lot of sacrifices, and it's stuff that you're never going to hear about, because only when we screw up do you find out about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that the general American population has no clue, and that you're in what you're doing and where you are. You're in countries that most people probably have never heard of, and doing things that it's better off that they don't know, for your protection and the protection of the nation.
Once you retired, how was the transition back to civilian life?
You're hitting me with, Louis, you got some good ones, man.
I'm glad.
Okay, we're in the no kidding zone. So okay.
Sure.
If you're in a more traditional job in the agency, it's not so bad, because it's like a big corporation. We've got human resource people who work a job similar to if you were working for Amazon, right? But the people who do the more exotic stuff, the ones, 25% of our population do 75% of the war zone tours. They're repeaters. Okay. So you, at a certain point, your life veers off, and you get farther and farther away from what everybody else is, how they are, how they live their lives. And it really catches you when you come out. Some of us, and I made that mistake even though I didn't really know I was doing it. I had a kind of belief that I was going to join the herd, that I was going to be able to kind of slip back in, and you can't. Or at least you can't in the way that you're going to blend in. You just don't. We're not like them anymore. Been gone too long. And the transition is a lot harder than I thought. And the agency has a good transition program. We have training courses like 3 years out, 1 year out, and then you have like a 2 to 3 month transition program just before you retire. And I left early to lighten this up a little bit. There's a joke that we laugh at the TV because they say, you never leave the agency alive. Well, that's kind of true. Most people, when they retire on a Friday, they show up back at work on Monday with a contractor's badge, and they keep working, you know, till they croak from a heart attack or something when they're 75. So some of us, which is more of my generation, some of us have decided we're not going to go to 70. I got out at the earliest. I got out at age 50 because the truth is I had done my last war zone. I had pretty much done everything I wanted to do there, and I wanted to try something different. It was time to get out of the bureaucracy. But it still was it's a transition because we don't retire at 50. You just transition to a new job or a new career or new something. But you got to figure that out. And the hard part is realizing you're different. And you're going to have to come to grips with that. And so I totally relate to, you know, the military transition issues, the law enforcement transition issues, because we're different.
Yeah. When I retired, it was the same. You know, it was, I retired at 54, and I was doing other things prior to that because I wanted to prep myself for the retirement. And I started maybe 5 years earlier. But yeah, you have to, like you said, you have to have something else to go into. And we are different, you know, and it's I don't know. I didn't want to go into being a security guard, you know, but so I kind of changed my path, you know, but and I was going somewhere with this. After you retired, did you have a plan? Okay, we talk about having that plan. Did you have a plan when your retirement was coming up as to what you wanted to do?
I kind of did. I read a book called "What Color Is Your Parachute for Retirement," and it was a book written for our generation because we don't retire like, you know, our parents and our grandparents did. You know, they finish a job and that's it. They get the rocking chair on the porch, and it's so it's more like a transition. So the book helped me figure out some areas that I wanted to stay into. Like I'm passionate about training. I'm passionate about personal safety, and so I've been kind of following that path. And so there was a plan, but one of the things when you're a type A and you're used to, and you've been in a career for 24 years, you get pretty good at certain things, you know, planning and executing the mission. It's not that simple when you retire, and now you got all these things you want to do, and you find out that you had a great plan. It was a great plan on paper. It just didn't work. And it wasn't your fault, but there's just so many other variables. And what I found was that every time I had this rock solid plan, life would take a left or a right on me. And at first I was irritated because I was like, I should have planned this out better. But sometimes you can't. And that's where you kind of have to let go a little bit. And it's not easy for those of us who are controlling, like to be in control. If I were going to say, giving up control or some of it, acknowledging that you're different, and that's okay, that it's okay to be different, and starting to really understand what the word adapt means. The old guys and gals that are happy, they know that word. They live that word, adapt. Those that survive adapt. Those that don't survive, don't adapt, they don't survive. So it's a huge word I keep bringing it up in my own head. We have to adapt as we get older. The shoulder goes now. No more flat bench. What do I do now? Adapt, right?
Right, exactly.
More is coming.
Sure. Yeah. Oh yeah. Now, do you, with your knowledge base and things you've done over your whole career, do you feel, and you say you're still into the training and the teaching part, are you touching into the civilian world now?
Yes. In fact, that's mainly what I'm working with, because right now it's very hard. It seems to be very hard to get in with the government agencies, because they either don't have the money, and even if they, like I was willing to do a lot of stuff just to support them, they don't even have the time. And that's not only just in the U.S. I was trying to work with the police elements in the Philippines, in Thailand. Yeah, they just don't have that. They can't break their people away long enough. Right. So it's a bit frustrating. But I've had to learn new terminology when I deal with the civilian world. Like when you're doing personal safety stuff, we used to say, don't be dumb and walk down a dark alley with your Rolex on. Nowadays, you can't say that, because that's victim blaming.
Right.
So I've had to learn more and more. And there's a level that I won't go. I mean, I've contemplated working at a community college, and I realized that's not going to work for me. That audience and I are not. We're going to have a moment.
Yeah. I get it. I get it. Anything else?
I'm going to ask you one more question, Tom. Excuse me. And I saw this comment on the video that I watched with you and Mike Riddle on Mike Drop, and it was I was just scrolling down through the comments, and I don't know who it was, but he said, I wish you guys would ask this question, and maybe we went over it or not, but I'll do it anyway. It said, what do we do as a nation once we know who, and when I say who, we're talking about terrorists, who they are, where they are, and that they're possibly up to something? I know it's tough, and we talked about the surveillance and all that stuff that you guys have done, but basically they wanted to know, what do we do as a nation?
For me, I look at this from a couple different perspectives, and because I was in it through, from '89 on, I was on duty working in our security operations center when really the first big terrorist event happened. This is prior to the first bombing of the World Trade Center. A Pakistani terrorist shot up our front gate at CIA headquarters. I was working our security operations center. I called the ambulances, and I was part of that whole. Okay, there's a wake-up call. I'm less than 2.5 years into my job. Okay, from that moment on, that was it. It was terrorism as part of breakfast, noon, and lunch, and dinner. So, and then I've worked overseas, and I've seen the animal in its home. I worked in Sudan, where every terrorist group was hanging out. That was their recreation spot. If you ask me what the big picture is, until the governments of the world decide that they're not going to tolerate this stuff. And I'm not quite saying that we have to get to the Federation of Planets level of cooperation, Star Trek, but we've got to get to the point where we start to coordinate and cooperate enough to destroy their logistical lines. They can't travel. They can't support themselves logistically. They can't get finances. If all the countries actually did what they were supposed to do, and we strangled them, they would be the minor problem in our lives. The problem is that they're not doing that. Killing them off one by one, allegedly through drone strikes. I don't know anything about that stuff. I'm just saying.
Hypothetically.
That's not effective either, because that's like I have an apartment next to your apartment. I throw my garbage everywhere. I have tons of cockroaches. You can kill all the cockroaches you want that crawl into your kitchen. Are you really solving the problem? No. The other part is, so from a bigger picture, we got to attack the problem globally to strangle that. The other thing is we can't tolerate certain behaviors by certain governments. If they support terrorism, they are the enemy. And that's where I agree with President Bush's reaction. You are either with us or against us. And us meaning not the U.S., the world, because it's too difficult when it's state-sponsored terrorism. They're just too protected, because you're making a good point, John, about how these training camps are they're a huge part of the deal. And when Pakistan was allowing them to do training camps, all terrorist activities in the world, pretty much like 90%, were Pakistani related. Either they came from Pakistan, they did training in Pakistan, they got support in Pakistan. So we can't have that. We need to coordinate better. And we can't allow state-sponsored terrorism. It just can't happen. But it takes a lot of coordination.
I'm sure there's a lot of red tape involved. God, I can only imagine. But
yeah. All right.
Tough question.
It's definitely been a pleasure talking to you, Tom. I'm learning the more I read about you and watch you on YouTube and all that stuff. So thank you for everything that you've done for our country, and our citizens.
Definitely. Thank you. And thank you for reaching out to me. I followed you from when I first saw you on the other podcast. I follow you. Let me ask you this: if somebody wanted to get in touch with you for training in the civilian world, do you do that, and how would they be able to get in touch with you?
I have a LinkedIn page with all my details are on there. They can contact me. I am also the senior consultant for training for the Acuri group, ARCURI group, and we specialize in situation awareness training. And as the backbone, the base level for personal safety, and it works in all the different areas. That's pretty much what I'm doing, and I'm working it from an angle of we're in COVID time, so we do remote. We're going to be, when things lighten up, we're going to start doing some in-person classes. So we're still available. We're finally gearing up for it.
Great. It's I'm sure it's a pretty damn good course, especially coming from you and your background. And people should check that out and take advantage of it, especially in the civilian world, in the world we're living in today, because we don't know from one day to the next where we're going to be.
What tomorrow holds.
Yeah, exactly. So, Tom, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. And on behalf of Lou and I and Jose, our editor in the background there, we appreciate your time. And we hope to speak to you again.
Hey, you guys, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.